Welcome to News El Salvador SV Podcast, a space for conversation and reflection where we explore current affairs in El Salvador and around the world together. You can contribute financially via PayPal or via Bitcoin QR code. You'll find the PayPal code in the content description and the Bitcoin QR code on the cover of this episode. Send your donation and include the subject of your submission, the reason for submitting, something like collaboration, talk about a topic I like so we can have a coffee, or contribute to your podcast. This is for internal monitoring purposes. Also remember, you can advertise through this space. If you're interested, include your email address in the description. Write to us. We'll be delighted to hear from you. Look for us on your favorite platform, Spotify, Amazon Music, and Apple Podcast. We're on almost all platforms. Search for us as News El Salvador SV. Okay, so let's dive right in. We're looking back at Friday, October 24th, 2025. And wow, what a day that was.
It really was. Felt like things were moving incredibly fast, both internationally and right here in El Salvador.
Absolutely. We saw these huge geopolitical tremors, major financial moves globally, and at the same time, some really foundational announcements happening domestically. So our mission today, as always, is to give you a structured, analytical deep dive into the key stories from that specific day. We'll start with the global picture, those escalating tensions, and then zoom in on El Salvador, the economy, crypto developments, security, the works.
And it's crucial to see how connected these are. The global situation, particularly the economic pressure campaigns and the pushback against them, provides essential context for understanding the choices El Salvador is making right now.
Definitely feels like a high-pressure environment all around.
No doubt about it.
Okay, let's tackle that core global conflict first, these escalating sanctions on Russia. It felt like October 24th marked a real step change, didn't it? With both the EU and the US making big moves almost simultaneously.
That's exactly right. It was a very calculated sort of twin action. You had the European Union approving its 19th sanctions package.
And Keith, that's a lot of packages.
Yeah. It is. And the headline here, the really significant part, is that for the first time, these measures explicitly target Russia's gas sector.
Ah, okay. That feels like crossing a major line.
Yeah.
They'd mostly avoided hitting gas directly before, hadn't they? Because of Europe's own dependency.
Precisely. For years, that was the third rail, you know, too vital for some European economies. So targeting gas now signals, well, perhaps a mix of determination and maybe some desperation to really cut off the funding for the war. And they also went after what they're calling Russia's shadow fleet.
Right, the shadow fleet. We hear that term mostly in relation to oil exports. What does hitting it actually involve? What are the mechanics?
Well, it's this vast, murky network of ships. We're talking thousands of often older tankers, maybe poorly insured, flying flags convenience, sometimes no clear flag at all.
Okay.
They're absolutely essential for Russia to bypass the G7 price cap on its oil and keep selling it around the world. So targeting the fleet means going after any Western entities still involved, like insurance companies, repair services, even refueling providers.
So making it practically much harder and more expensive for Russia to physically move its oil.
Exactly. It increases the risk and the cost exponentially, aiming to choke off that vital revenue stream.
And while the EU was announcing its package, the United States, under President Donald Trump's administration, wasn't sitting idle either.
No. They came in with parallel measures. The U.S. imposed its own new sanctions, and these went right for the giants, Russia's two largest oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil.
Wow. Rosneft and Lukoil, those are huge. What's the direct impact of U.S. sanctions on them?
It primarily restricts their access to the U.S. dollar financial system. Any bank or company, anywhere in the world really, dealing with them faces the risk of secondary sanctions from the U.S. Treasury. It makes doing business with them incredibly toxic financially.
So this coordinated pressure, EU on gas and the fleet, U.S. on the major oil producers, the goal seems pretty clear.
Absolutely explicit. Both sets of measures are designed to ramp up the pressure on Moscow, force them to halt the war in Ukraine, and push them towards some kind of peace agreement.
And we saw a direct consequence of this pressure cooker environment reported that same day, didn't we? The planned summit between President Trump and President Putin.
Yes, that got postponed. The official reports cited the reason as the Kremlin not having agreed to a ceasefire beforehand. So the diplomatic track stalled right alongside the economic escalation.
It really highlights the stakes, and the language used by officials was also quite stark. You mentioned the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen.
Yes, her statement was very pointed. She was quoted directly in the source material saying, "We are maintaining the pressure on the aggressor. For the first time, we strike Russia's gas sector, the heart of its war economy. We will not relent until the people of Ukraine have a just and lasting peace."
The heart of its war economy. That's strong language. But going back to hitting the gas sector, is this a sign that the previous 18 packages maybe weren't working as intended? Is it genuine leverage now, or more like a last resort?
That's a really important question. I think it's probably a bit of both. It's definitely leverage, cutting off a major income source, but it's also a calculated risk for the West.
Risk how?
Well, stopping the remaining gas flows, whether pipeline or LNG, could still cause price spikes or energy shortages in parts of Europe even now. They seem willing to accept that pain.
So a shift towards a more aggressive economic posture, even if it hurts them too.
It seems that way. Hitting gas and the oil fleet simultaneously suggests they're trying to make the cost of continuing the war simply unbearable for Russia, almost regardless of the short-term blowback on Western economies. Hashtag tag 1.2 global pushback and economic sovereignty. But, and this is the crucial counterpoint from October 24th, the effectiveness of these really tough Western measures was immediately challenged. We saw a very forceful pushback from key global players.
Right, this wasn't universally accepted. Who are the main voices rejecting these sanctions? The source material mentioned China and India.
Exactly, and they are absolutely pivotal because they represent huge markets and alternative financial pathways that Russia relies on to weather these sanctions.
So what did China say specifically?
China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs came out strongly against them. The spokesman, Guo Jiakun, used their standard but significant framing. He stated that China consistently opposes unilateral sanctions that are not based on international law or authorized by the United Nations Security Council.
Okay, not authorized by the UN Security Council. Why is that specific phrase so important in this context, especially now with these tougher sanctions?
Because it gives them, and potentially others, a kind of legal cover to essentially ignore the sanctions. By positioning themselves as defenders of international law against unilateral actions, China can justify continuing trade and financial dealings with Russia, especially outside the dollar system, without looking like they're simply siding against the West.
It's a way to sidestep the pressure while still pursuing their own interests.
Precisely. And it limits the real-world impact the sanctions can have if major economies simply refuse to comply.
Yeah. And India. They're often courted by the West, but they also took a strong stance.
Very strong. Piyush Goyal, the Minister of Commerce and Industry, was speaking at the Berlin Global Dialogue, ironically enough.
Oh, yeah.
And he was remarkably blunt. He was quoted saying, "India considers it unacceptable to receive external instructions about who to be friends with and trade with and who not."
Wow, no ambiguity there.
Yeah.
Just outright rejection of being told what to do economically.
Absolutely. And think about the implications. India is getting massive amounts of discounted Russian crude oil right now. It helps their economy, keeps inflation down.
Right.
So by rejecting these external instructions, India secures its energy needs, boosts its economy, and frankly, gains leverage with the very Western countries trying to enforce sanctions. It directly provides Russia with a major market the West is trying to close off.
So the sanctions are escalating, but the global consensus is fracturing just as quickly. The West is pushing harder, but key parts of the world are pushing back just as hard, prioritizing their own economic sovereignty.
That's the perfect summary. The cost of compliance for many nations seems to outweigh the benefits of aligning with the West on this, leading to these very public rejections. It really highlights the rise of a more multipolar economic reality. Hashtag tag 1.3. Other international highlights. October 24 to 2025.
Okay, let's quickly touch on some other significant international stories that broke on October 24th. There were several security and political developments. Starting in our region, in Ecuador, President Daniel Noboa made a very serious allegation, denouncing an attempt to poison him.
Yes, reporting that toxic substances were found in gifts he received. That's a shocking claim.
It really is. What does that signal about the situation he's dealing with down there?
It suggests the security crisis is incredibly deep and dangerous. We're not just talking about street crime. This points towards powerful groups, maybe criminal networks or political rivals, willing to use extreme, potentially lethal methods to destabilize the government right at the very top, a direct threat to the head of state.
Chilling. Okay, shifting to the Middle East, there was a development regarding the governance of Gaza.
Yes, reports indicated that Hamas had reached an agreement with other Palestinian factions to transfer the day-to-day government of Gaza to a committee of technocrats.
A technocrat committee. What might that signify?
Well, it could be several things. Possibly an attempt by Hamas to distance itself from direct governance responsibilities, especially given the immense humanitarian crisis. It might be a way to present a more neutral administrative face, perhaps paving the way for future negotiations or a different power-sharing arrangement in the future. It's a complex internal political maneuver.
Interesting. And then in the Caribbean, a major U.S. military deployment.
A very significant one. The United States deployed its largest aircraft carrier to the Caribbean specifically for counter-narcotics operations.
An aircraft carrier. For drug interdiction. That sounds like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Is that typical?
Not at all. It's an extremely powerful asset, usually reserved for major geopolitical hotspots. Deploying a carrier strike group like that suggests they are targeting very high-level, sophisticated trafficking operations, maybe involving semi-submersibles or large-scale coordination that requires extensive air and sea surveillance and rapid response capabilities.
And tragically, that deployment had immediate lethal consequences reported that day, too.
Yes, sadly. News emerged that the United States had attacked an alleged drug boat somewhere in the Caribbean, resulting in 6 deaths. It underscores the high risks and the potentially violent nature of these interdiction efforts against heavily harmed traffickers.
A stark reminder of the sharp end of those operations.
Indeed.
And just briefly, on a more positive diplomatic note in Latin America.
Yes, a small but welcome development. 17 Colombian nationals who had been imprisoned in Venezuela were released and returned home, signaling some ongoing, if slow, normalization of relations between those two countries.
Okay, so we've painted the global picture.
Yeah.
Intense economic warfare, sanctions reaching new heights, but also major economies pushing back, charting their own course.
Exactly. And that global backdrop, this whole theme of seeking financial alternatives and sovereignty is really the perfect framing as we transition now to what was happening right here in El Salvador on October 24th.
Because the domestic news was heavily focused on finance and economic strategy, wasn't it?
Very much so. Moves that seem aimed at strengthening the local economy while also building out this unique regulated crypto infrastructure.
All right. Before we dive into those specifics, the Aguinaldo, the new Bitcoin licenses, we need to take our usual quick pause. This deep dive, connecting these global events to the specific policies and developments in El Salvador, really depends on the support we get from you, our listeners. So just a reminder about how you can collaborate or contribute. You can use PayPal or the Bitcoin QR code. You'll find the PayPal link in the description of this deep dive, and the Bitcoin QR code is right there on the cover image. Every contribution helps us keep digging into these stories, putting the pieces together, and bringing you this level of analysis. We really appreciate it. Okay, let's get into the El Salvador headlines from October 24th, 2025. The biggest domestic news seemed to be a major financial injection into the economy.
That's right. President Nayib Bukele announced that the government was paying out the annual bonus, the Aguinaldo, to public sector employees that very day, Friday, October 24th.
That's much earlier than the usual December timeframe, isn't it?
Significantly earlier. And this was enabled by a recent legislative reform allowing the early payment.
What was the stated reason for moving it up by basically 2 months?
The official mandate, according to the reports, was explicitly to dynamize the national economy. The idea is to get that money into people's pockets well ahead of the traditional Christmas shopping season.
To stimulate spending sooner.
Exactly. Inject liquidity into the market now, potentially boosting retail, helping small businesses, getting money circulating during what might otherwise be a slower period before the holidays.
But does paying it early actually create new economic activity? Or does it just pull forward spending that would have happened in December anyway? Could it leave a gap later on?
That's the core economic debate around this, isn't it? Critics would argue exactly that it's just shifting consumption timing. But the government's calculation is likely focused on the immediate impact.
Like getting a boost right now.
Right. Maybe capturing spending during October sales events, perhaps hitting different spending patterns than December. It could provide a needed short-term stimulus, but economists will definitely be watching spending in early 2026 to see if that anticipated dip materializes.
And legally, how did this work for the employees? Was it the full amount? Was it mandatory?
Good questions. The reports clarified two key things. First, even though it was paid in October, the bonus amount had to be calculated as if it were paid in December, based on existing Salvadoran law. So employees got the full amount they were legally due based on their service time.
Okay, so no one lost out financially by getting it early.
Correct. And second, importantly, receiving the payment early was optional for the public sector workers. They could choose to wait until the traditional December date if that suited their personal finances better. Hashtag 3.2 Bitcoin regulation and regional expansion.
Okay, let's shift from that broad stimulus to the more specific financial infrastructure news. This connects directly back to that global theme of seeking alternative financial pathways, especially concerning crypto. October 24th saw a pretty significant development in El Salvador's regulated crypto space.
A very significant one. A company called Swapito SAS-CV, which operates under the commercial name Oreo, officially received its Bitcoin Service Provider License, the BSP license, from the Central Reserve Bank, the BCR.
Okay, the BSP license. What does that legally allow Oreo to do now in El Salvador?
It means they are fully authorized under Salvadoran law to offer Bitcoin exchange services, buying and selling Bitcoin, and also Bitcoin custody services, so securely holding Bitcoin for clients.
And this company, Oreo, it's not just a local startup.
No, and that's a key part of the story. Oreo actually originates from Mexico. Their strategy seems explicitly regional. They're using El Salvador's established legal framework for Bitcoin as a launchpad, a regulated base from which to offer digital asset services across Latin America.
That's ambitious.
Well,
how do they bridge their operations between El Salvador and Mexico in a compliant way? Is that straightforward?
They seem to have structured it carefully. In Mexico, they maintain compliance through an agreement with a local entity, Soluciones Tecnológicas Nagmatec, SAPI-DCV. And crucially, for moving funds, they use the NVIO Pagos API, which connects to Mexico's SPEI system.
The SPEI, that's the main interbank payment system in Mexico, right? Like FedWire or ACH-US.
Exactly. It's the real-time electronic payment network. So by linking their regulated Salvadoran Bitcoin operations back to Mexican pesos via STI, they're building a compliant pipeline for digital asset flows between these two key economies.
That sounds pretty sophisticated. And it seems like getting the BSP license is just the first step for Oreo. They have bigger plans?
They certainly do. Reports on October 24th indicated they plan to apply for a second license in El Salvador. This one is the Digital Asset Service Provider License, or DSP license, which is issued by the National Commission of Digital Assets, the CNA.
Okay, BSP first, then DSP. What's the difference? Why do they need the DSP license as well?
The BSP license is really focused on Bitcoin itself, exchange, and custody. The DSP license is broader. It's required if you want to offer services involving other digital assets, and critically, this includes stablecoins.
Ah, stablecoins, the ones pegged to currencies like the US dollar.
Precisely. Stablecoins are seen as vital for real-world business use cases like remittances, B2B payments, institutional trading, because they don't have Bitcoin's wild price volatility. So getting the DSP license would allow Oreo to offer these more stable, transaction-friendly digital assets, which is essential for attracting serious corporate and institutional clients.
Got it. So it's about moving beyond just Bitcoin into broader, potentially more mainstream digital finance.
Exactly. And this ambition is backed by funding. The news also highlighted that Oreo's progress follows a $1.1 million pre-seed investment round.
Okay.
And that round was led exclusively by a fund called Early Riders. And the stated goal of that investment is really interesting. They aim to develop the first native multi-institutional custody solution, MIC, in Latin America, based out of El Salvador.
Multi-institutional custody.
Yeah.
MIC. That sounds technical, but probably very important. Break that down for us. Why is MIC significant?
It's hugely significant. Think about big money pension funds, banks, corporations. They can't just hold crypto on a regular exchange account. They need highly secure, regulated, audited storage solutions that's institutional custody.
Right, like how they handle stocks or bonds.
Exactly. Multi-institutional means it's designed to serve multiple large clients securely. If Oreo can build the first native MIC solution in Latin America that complies with El Salvador's specific digital asset laws, it basically sends a signal to the entire region.
What kind of signal?
The El Salvador isn't just about adopting Bitcoin as currency, it's building the regulated high-security infrastructure needed for serious institutional players to participate in the digital asset economy. It's something traditional banks in the region have been very slow or hesitant to offer. It could make El Salvador a genuine hub for institutional digital asset management.
That really reframes the narrative from just individual adoption to building foundational financial plumbing.
Precisely. It validates the long-term strategic vision.
And speaking of the government's vision and investment, there was a relevant figure reported regarding public spending in this area too, wasn't there?
Yes, context is key here. The reports mentioned that over the preceding 3 years, the government of El Salvador had spent $49 million on its own Bitcoin Funds Administrator Agency.
$49 million. That's a substantial public investment.
It is. And when you see that figure, the arrival and licensing of private sector players like Oreo, who are bringing in their own investment, like that $1.1 million from early riders, becomes even more crucial.
Was that?
Because for the government strategy to be sustainable long-term, it can't just be public spending. You need private companies building out the ecosystem, attracting foreign capital, developing these sophisticated solutions like MIC. It shifts the burden from the taxpayer and helps justify that initial public outlay by creating a potentially self-sustaining industry.
Okay, let's move from finance to justice, security, and public life. October 24th also saw several developments in these areas, reflecting both international cooperation and domestic issues, starting with a rather unusual international case involving deportation. The United States was planning to deport a Salvadoran national, Kilmar Abrego, but not back to El Salvador, to Liberia, in Africa.
Yes, that's highly unusual. Deporting a Central American national to an African country is rare.
What could possibly be the reason for that?
The reports didn't specify the exact circumstances, but it likely points to a very complex immigration history. Perhaps Abrego had previous residency or citizenship links to Liberia, or maybe asylum claims were denied in both the U.S. and El Salvador, leading U.S. authorities to designate Liberia based on some other factor, like place of birth or previous nationality documentation. It really underscores the sometimes convoluted nature of international deportation processes.
Definitely complex. Okay, closer to home, there was cooperation with Honduras.
Yes, El Salvador handed over a man to Honduran authorities who was accused of trafficking people towards the United States. So that's an example of regional cooperation against transnational crime.
And domestically ongoing legal proceedings.
Several were reported. A man was ordered into provisional prison in La Union, accused of killing a Honduran national. Separately, in Chalatenango Centro, a man was captured, accused of injuring someone with a machete in Canton Piedras Gordas. These highlight the persistence of violent crime at the local level.
There was also a significant seizure at the border.
Right, a Panamanian national was arrested at the El Amatillo border crossing. They were found to be transporting fertilizers valued at over $20,000.
$20,000 worth of fertilizer. Why is that necessarily a security issue?
Because large quantities of certain types of fertilizer, particularly those containing ammonium nitrate, can potentially be diverted from agricultural use to be used as components in manufacturing explosives. So large undeclared shipments like that always raise red flags for border security.
I see, okay. And on the institutional front, there was some external scrutiny directed at El Salvador.
Yes, from the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, the CIDH, they formally requested that the state of El Salvador implement policies specifically designed to protect human rights defenders working in the country.
What does a request like that imply?
It generally suggests that the Commission has received information or documented concerns about the operating environment for activists and civil society groups. It could relate to threats, harassment, restrictions on their work, or lack of effective protection mechanisms. It puts pressure on the government to address these concerns and demonstrate compliance with international human rights norms.
And one more note on the judicial front involving a political figure.
Yes, a quick turnaround involving the former mayor of Zacatecoluca, Francisco Salvador Hirezi. Reports indicated he returned to prison custody after having only been released for a very short period. This points to ongoing legal battles and perhaps appeals or reviews in high-profile corruption cases. Hashtag 4.2, other incidents and public figures.
Now, there were a couple of other sensitive stories reported on October 24th that we should touch on carefully. One involved a tragedy related to a government program.
Yes. Tragically, a young man who had been captured under the state of exception regime and was participating in the Cero Ocio work program died. The cause of death reported was an electric shock while working.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
Given the circumstances detained under the exception regime, working in a state program, this surely requires careful investigation.
Absolutely. Any death in custody or within a state-run program, especially involving someone detained under emergency powers, demands a thorough, transparent, and impartial investigation to determine the exact circumstances and any potential negligence or liability.
And shifting to the political sphere, there was an issue involving misinformation.
Yes. Denny Portillo, who is the Secretary General of the political party Vamos, publicly denounced what she described as misinformation campaigns being run against her on certain YouTube channels.
What does that tell us about the current political climate?
It highlights, I think, the increasing role of online platforms and social media as battlegrounds for political narratives and, unfortunately, sometimes for smear tactics and disinformation. It's a challenge political figures across the spectrum seem to be facing more and more.
And finally, just to set the physical scene for that day, we need to mention the weather. There was a storm system influencing the region.
That's right. Tropical Storm Melissa was lingering in the Caribbean. While it had temporarily stalled, meteorologists warned its indirect influence was still being felt in El Salvador, causing winds up to around 35 kilometers per hour.
And there was a specific warning about it.
Yes, a warning about its potential for rapid intensification once it started moving again. These warnings are crucial for preparedness, especially for coastal areas and infrastructure vulnerable to high winds and heavy rain, which remain a constant threat in our region.
Okay, let's lighten the mood slightly as we wrap up the day's news analysis. Amidst all the serious economic and security news, there were some moments of national pride coming from the sporting world.
Yes. Specifically from the Guatemala 2025 Central American Games that were ongoing.
What were the highlights for El Salvador reported on October 24th?
Well, in football, the under-20 national team, the Selecta U20, managed to secure a really hard-fought win against Nicaragua. That victory propelled them into the semifinals of the tournament.
That's great news for the youth team. A good sign for the future of Salvadoran football.
Definitely a positive result. And the success wasn't just in football. Reports also highlighted that El Salvador was, and I quote, shining with gold in archery at the games.
Archery gold, fantastic. Good to see success across different disciplines.
Absolutely. And related to football, though maybe more philosophical, there was a quote reported that day from Hernan Blio Gomez, the coach of the senior national team.
Oh yeah, what did he say?
Just a simple but resonant observation. In football, there is also opposition.
In football, there is also opposition. A reminder that challenges and competitors are part of the game and maybe part of life too.
I thought it was a nice little reflection on the nature of competition. Hashtag 5.2 tourism and local promotion.
And finally, let's touch briefly on tourism, which remains a major focus for national development and promotion.
Yes, the government continues to heavily promote its key tourism assets. On October 24th, specific destinations like Sunset Park and the Walter Thilo Deininger Surf City Adventure Park were being highlighted as must-see destinations.
Part of that ongoing Surf City strategy along the coast.
Exactly. And beyond just promoting sites, the news also mentioned that more than 100 tourism-related companies are actively working together to strengthen the overall tourism value chain.
What does strengthening the value chain mean in practice?
It means improving all the interconnected parts of the tourism experience: accommodation, food service, transportation, tours, local crafts, etc. Having over 100 companies collaborating suggests a growing level of private sector organization and investment aimed at making the entire tourism offering more robust and appealing. It signals confidence in the sector's future. Hashtag outro, hashtag 6.1, summary and synthesis. So to kind of wrap up the key takeaways from Friday, October 24th, 2025, it felt like a day where major global and domestic financial strategies really came into sharp focus.
Yeah, internationally, you had that peak intensity of Western sanctions hitting Russian gas, the shadow fleet, but met immediately with that very forceful pushback from China and India, really highlighting the growing fragmentation.
Right, the sanctions got tougher, but the global consensus weakened simultaneously. And then domestically in El Salvador, the big stories were also financial, but with a different flavor.
The early aguinaldo payment is a direct economic stimulus.
Paired with that significant step forward in regulating the private crypto sector. The licensing of Oreo, their regional ambitions, the pursuit of that DAXP license, and multi-institutional custody, it all points towards a serious effort to build out a distinct financial infrastructure.
So connecting those threads, as we leave you to think about this day, here's maybe a final thought. We see the traditional global financial system under strain, with major powers clashing over sanctions and economic influence. At the exact same time, El Salvador is accelerating its efforts to build this regulated, crypto-based financial system, like with Oreo getting licensed to handle Bitcoin and aiming for stablecoins and institutional custody next. Is this El Salvador anticipating this global fragmentation and cleverly positioning itself with an alternative, independent financial rail for a more multipolar world? Or is it a gamble, doubling down on a volatile tech sector precisely when the global economy feels most unstable?
That's the big question, isn't it? Strategy or gamble? Only time will tell how it plays out. Hashtag TagTag 6.2 mandatory financial and farewell.
And making sense of these complex, fast-moving events is exactly what we aim to do here. This kind of detailed deep dive, covering everything from global sanctions to local crypto licenses on a specific day like October 24th, takes significant time and effort. Which brings us back to how you can support this work. We genuinely rely on our listeners. Please remember, you can contribute financially through PayPal, the link is in the description, or by using the Bitcoin QR code you see on the cover art for this deep dive. Every donation truly helps us continue dedicating the resources needed to bring you this level of in-depth analysis and context. We're incredibly grateful for your support. Thank you so much for tuning in today and joining us for this exploration of the news. We hope you found it insightful and look forward to having you back with us for the next episode.